Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung and Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi held a summit today in Nara, Takaichi's political home base, in a meeting that blended symbolism with substance. For the first time, President Lee formally raised a specific historical issue, the recovery of Korean remains from the 1942 Josai coal mine disaster, marking a shift from broad gestures to actionable dialogue. The two sides also agreed to open formal talks on wider cooperation from AI and intellectual property to economic security and joint responses to social challenges. Though the summit may not have delivered headline-grabbing breakthroughs, it did offer a window into how both leaders intend to manage the past while navigating future challenges. For a closer look into the outcomes of this latest summit, we connect to Christophe Godin, Professor of Political Science at Kookmin University. A big welcome, Professor.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Chae Eun-mi, Research Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Good to see you, Dr. Chae.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Now, let's begin a discussion first with Professor Godin. Of course, we want to hear your overall impression of today's summit. How did you view the tone and the substance of the meeting between President Lee and Prime Minister Takaichi?
Well, the tone, I would say, was cordial, measured, and it could be argued that no major breakthrough was delivered. And in fact, this would be only half true. Economically speaking, of course, no major announcement was to be expected. First, because of international reasons, because of the broader international context. Both countries, Korea and Japan, need stability. We're navigating uncharted waters because of all of this chaos that the Trump administration is causing. So to this extent, both Korea and Japan, of course, could not make any flashing, impressive announcement. On top of it, you know that Ms. Takaichi, so the Prime Minister of Japan, she's only able to rely on a relatively unstable majority at the Japanese parliament, at the Japanese Diet, and she's even expected to call snap elections soon. So obviously for her, it is not the right time to implement any major political shift. Still, something unexpected happened, something you mentioned actually in your introduction. It is a fact that President Lee, for the first time, decided to address historical issues that is in some sort of bilateral summit. And what is interesting is that President Lee, first, as you mentioned, tried to address this Josai coal mine disaster in 1942. But something else, it is a fact that he expressed a significant disagreement regarding China, because Mr. Takaichi, a couple months ago, emphasized the need for a strong reaction should China invade Taiwan anytime soon, while President Lee obviously emphasized the exact opposite, that is peace and the need for negotiations in the region. So long story short, economically speaking, both countries agree. Politically speaking, regarding war, regarding history, I think significant concerns have been raised by President Lee, also with a very measured tone, not aggressively at all, but still, it was said. Things were said.
Right, so it seemed like we had a meaningful step forward when it comes to addressing historical issues. What about Dr. Chae? We also want to hear your perspective. Was there a particular moment or message that stood out for you?
Well, at this time, the one thing actually I want to answer about the low level. I mean, the very simple things. I mean, one thing actually, the Prime Minister Takaichi's facial expressions. Sometimes I think her facial expression says all. I mean, it's so clear and expressive, and I was especially struck by how she came right out to the door and to greet President Lee. happy and when he arrived and smiling so brightly. So it means that she think and also she needs Korea, and then Korea and Japan has a really good relations these days. And of course, in the contents, one of the achievements, the Josai coal mine things also impressive. But I think I also want to point out one thing about China, because the President Lee visited Japan under the China-Japan's conflict. So during the joint conference, when the President Lee mentioned Korea, Japan, and China together, we need to cooperate like that. But it was really good mentions. But I wonder why he didn't bring it up like that kind of mentions during his visit China last week. That was the things I have.
Right, of course. President Lee's mention of China was also very noteworthy. We will touch upon that as we continue our discussion. But before that, we want to touch upon, the visually and diplomatically significant portion, which was the setting itself. President Lee chose to hold the summit in Nara, Prime Minister Takaichi's hometown. Dr. Cho, what kind of message do you think does that selection of the location send in terms of tone and diplomacy?
Yeah, we can look at this from three angles, I think. The first one is Korea-Japan relations and diplomacy, and the second one is political things, and third one is cultural exchanges. First, on the diplomatic side, the shuttle diplomacy between two countries, between two leaders, has always been talked up between the countries, but it was hard to keep going. Since President Lee's government started, there have been 6 meetings already, including this time, and not just in Tokyo or Seoul, and these happened in local spots like Busan and Gyeongju, and now and this time Nara. That shows the relationship between Korea and Japan has really now stabilized. This set up a political cycle with Andong and President Lee's hometown potentially next for the following meetings. And second one is, even though this time's summit in Nara came from the President Lee's suggestions at the last meeting in Gyeongju, APEC, but Nara itself has a deep historical ties with Korea. There were a lot of exchanges in architecture and Buddhism and also arts. The tomorrow's visit to Horyuji is a great example that share the history. And the third one is actually as the political things, especially for the domestic politics. Domestic politics in Japan. I mean, the holding it in the Prime Minister Takaichi's hometown gave Japan a big boost in support and helped to maximize the summit results. Especially, there might happen a lower house elections soon under Takaichi cabinet, and then it can create a perfect conditions for diplomatic wins.
Indeed, the setting itself alone seemed to speak volumes itself. Now, let's get into the substance of the latest summit. There seems to have been a shift, like we've touched upon a while ago. President Lee officially raised the Josai coal mine issue for the very first time. Professor Godang, what does that move actually say about bilateral level of trust or strategy?
I think strategy is a right word, because it is not as radical a move as it may seem. In fact, what is interesting with President Lee's diplomacy is that it is a very step-by-step approach. Anytime he can push for Korean interests, he does. So this is what he's doing now. Mr. Takaichi is in a somehow unstable position in Japanese politics. As Dr. Choi mentioned, Japan now needs Korea for economic reasons. And so President Lee is trying to use this advantage. In fact, Dr. Choi earlier brought up a very interesting question. Why is it that President Lee wouldn't bring up the same issues when he visited China recently? I think the answer is simple, because facing China, Korea is in a position of weakness. So the less you say, the better it is. While for now, facing Japan, before Japan, Korea is in a position of strength. And so President Lee is using this position in order to push for Korean interests and, of course, for Japan to admit the war crimes committed during the Japanese rule, colonization, World War II, etc. That being said, this approach of President Lee is less radical than it seems, because the Josai coal mine incident is history, and it is not known to most Japanese citizens. So this way, regarding this incident, it is relatively easy for Ms. Takaichi to somehow make minimal acknowledgements. What I mean is that the Josai coal mine is history, while Dokdo is happening now. So what is interesting about all of it is that, of course, Josai means Korean-Japanese relations. Josai means history, but Josai is not Dokdo. So it is not too violent a point of contention. It is a way to bring Korean-Japanese relation issues on the table without being too aggressive.
So it could be a very good topic that could break the ice when it comes to discussions on historic issues. But as Professor Godang just mentioned, just weeks ago, actually, Prime Minister Takaichi reiterated Japan's false claims over Dokdo, and it seems, though, the issue still hasn't come up in the talks today. Dr. Che, how are both sides managing such flashpoints while keeping talks stable?
Well, to be honest, I think it doesn't look like they are diving deep into the really sensitive conflict issues between two countries. Yeah. So when the problems pop up, we see both sides not overreacting. For example, the Sadomain memorial events or the Black Eagles incident, they both passed without much friction. So it seems Korea and Japanese government are avoiding big provocations when issues arises. So I'm not sure, but if just moving past problem without solving them is really good for the relationship in the long run. In that aspect, I think Korea and Japan needs to build a relationship where they can talk about uncomfortable issues as well. That's the goal of the shuttle diplomacy, but it will take more time and efforts to build up the kind of relationship.
Right, definitely. There are still topics that are quite controversial between the two countries. But going back to the Josai coal mine topic that started the talks on historic issues between the two sides, how significant is it, Dr. Che, that the two sides are now moving towards concrete steps like DNA analysis?
Yeah, this is actually the first time under President Lee's government that they are openly talked about the historical issues, and it's also concrete outcomes we saw today. So, however, the Josai coal mine issue isn't as tough as some other historic problems actually. So, because there are the Japanese victims were involved there. It was easier for Japan to cooperate compared to other very sensitive past problems. And also, the last year they found the remains believed to be from victims, which gave both governments a solid basis to team up on this. And also was the government stepping into support the private sector's efforts, we can expect better result. It wasn't widely watched issues before, so this can bring comfort to overlooked victims. The big meaning here is that both countries agreed to work together on that past issues. It's a small but meaningful progress, I think, and I hope this came the first step toward discussing the really tough ones we need to tackle, like forced labor issues or comfort women issues.
Right, definitely a small but meaningful one. Now, let's also turn to the economic side of today's talks. The two leaders agreed to move beyond trade-centered ties and open formal discussions on broader cooperation, including tech innovation, economic security, and AI as well. So, what kind of shift does this signal in bilateral economic relationship, Professor Godin?
Well, it's quite simple. What is happening now is that as AI keeps developing, and it keeps developing much faster than expected, of course, it's good news. But it also means that the need for investments is going along just as fast. And of course, competing with China or with America, neither Korea nor Japan alone can make it. So Japan needs Korea, Korea needs Japan. And I think this is why, as Dr. Chue mentioned earlier, Prime Minister Takaichi tried to make it as obvious as possible with her facial features, with her greeting messages, and so forth, that Korea was welcome in Japan. So a program of joint investments has been announced, and there is no other way. Both countries need each other. Another thing I need to mention is that the Korean tech industry, for the moment, is doing better than the Japanese tech industry. For instance, if you look at the top 10 of semiconductor producing companies, today you've got Korean companies. Even Samsung today is number one. While if you think of Japan, right now, the Japanese tech industry is falling behind. 20 years ago, in the top 10, of semiconductor producing companies, you had 3 Japanese corporations. Today, you have none. And so I think from a Japanese point of view, inflation in Japan is more severe than in Korea. The fear of decline is even more severe in Japan than in Korea. So Japan probably needs Korea even more than Korea needs Japan. And this is why Ms. Takaichi tried to move forward past historical issues to make this cooperation happen as fast and as big as possible.
So a more proactive stance we're seeing from Japan. But before we conclude our discussion tonight, Professor Godin, like we've touched upon a while ago, China-Japan tensions are obviously rising lately. Do you think that the two leaders are also aligning more on regional security and deterrence?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. Mr. Takaichi has taken a very proactive stance on Taiwan, and President Lee has done the opposite. Mostly, I think, for domestic reasons. What is happening now in Japan is that the Liberal Democratic Party, so the ruling party of Mr. Takaichi, is losing ground, and there is a far right-wing populist party that is on the rise. So the Sanseito in Japanese, which in English you could loosely translate as the do-it-yourself party. And for Mr. Takaichi, it is impossible to look weak in front of this more radical competition. While in the case of President Lee, he's got 2 things Mr. Takaichi doesn't have. He's got time because he was elected for 5 years. So he's in office for at least 4 more years, 4 years and a half. And he's got a stable majority in parliament. While Mr. Takaichi is not enjoying the same kind of majority, and she's even expected to call for a snap election like next month. So she's forced to take a more radical stance to look tough. Maybe this is just electoral campaigning. Maybe this will change in the future, but for the moment, this is what it is.
All right, so it will be good to see on how the two sides would navigate future relations between each other post-summit. But we'll have to leave our discussion right here tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Godong.
Thanks a lot.
And of course, Dr. Che, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.